An 18-year-old black kid, homeless, penniless, pedaling a beat-up bike to make deliveries just to hold on to the last roof over his head. But on that freezing night, he gave up even his last place to sleep, just to take a confused old woman home. And that one act, what some would call foolish, opened a door he never dared to dream existed. That night, the wind had teeth. It didn't just bite skin. It slipped past scars, stabbed through coats, and sank into the bones of people who'd long stopped complaining. In a forgotten corner of town, winter didn't leave, it clung, like a debt no one could repay. Cold didn't need snow or ice, just silence. People walked fast, heads down, collars up. No one made eye contact. At the edge of town, wedged between a shuttered laundromat and a flickering neon sign that hadn't seen a paint job in years, lived a boy named Andre, 18. Or more accurately, survived. Andre didn't really belong here. His mother brought him when he was 6, fleeing a city that had already taken nearly everything. She died of cancer 2 winters ago. Since then, it had just been Andre and the streets and the rusted bike his mom left behind. That bike was an antique. Peeling paint, threadbare tires, a chain that skipped like it was playing a game. But Andre kept it alive like it was breathing. It was his delivery van, his ambulance, his last hope. If it fit in the bag, groceries, medicine, hot meals from the soup kitchen, he'd carry it, rain or shine, day or night. Andre didn't talk much. Not because he was shy, but because there was no room left in him for unnecessary words. But his eyes told stories people remembered long after he'd ridden away. That day, Andre's eyes looked tired. Not sleepy tired. Worn down tired. The kind that comes from counting coins too many times and always coming up short. At 5:42 p.m., Andre had one last delivery. If he made it, he'd have just enough to pay for a night at the motel, barely. If he missed the cutoff, the landlord would change the locks. He'd done it before, no warning, just left a garbage bag of clothes on the steps like a returned item. Andre tightened the strap of his faded canvas bag. His fingers were frozen, but he didn't stop. He looked up. The winter sun had dipped behind the rooftops, and shadows stretched across cracked pavement like silent memories. He passed Johnson's Market fog on the windows, the faint scent of onions and bleach slipping through the door, and nodded to Mr. Johnson, sweeping the porch. The old man nodded back, just a slight tilt of the head, like saying, "I see you." But the truth was, no one really saw Andre. Not because he was invisible, because he was too easy to overlook. Just a moving shadow, but shadows always stay near the light, whether people notice or not. As Andre turned onto Willow Street, his breath came out in clouds, like ghost smoke. Lights blinked on behind thin curtains. TV screens flickered through windows. Life went on, quiet, ordinary, unchanging. And then he saw her, an old woman, standing still at a bus stop nobody used anymore. A worn wool coat, arms wrapped around a sagging leather purse, silver hair, not the kind from a bottle, but the kind earned by time. She stared down the street, eyes searching like she was waiting for something she couldn't quite name. Andre slowed down just enough for a second look. Ended up, he should have kept riding. He really should have kept riding, but he did. He stopped, feet still on the pedals. His heart slowed, not from exhaustion, but from that strange pull in the air. That quiet pinch in your chest when you know you're about to choose between what's right and what keeps you alive. He looked again. She stood there, frail as paper in the wind, streetlight glinting off her hair like she was glowing in the thickening dark. She kept repeating the same few lines, soft, like her voice might vanish into the cold. We were 12 Willow Lane, or was it Garden Street? She watched every car rush past, then looked down again. Like even her own legs were strangers. Every time she stepped toward the curb, she pulled back, confused, disoriented, alone. Andre swallowed hard. It was 5:56 p.m. He had just over an hour to make his delivery, but the route was long and the temperature dropped every minute. If he didn't make it, there'd be no place to sleep tonight. Then her voice came again, this time weaker, more lost. Has anyone seen the bus? I need to get home. He didn't know why, but Andre stepped off the bike. He walked it toward her, careful, like not to startle her. Good evening, ma'am, Andre said, gently. You waiting on a bus? Is something wrong? She looked up. Her eyes were cloudy with age, but inside there was something else. A fragile kind of trust, the kind that only exists in people who've got no one left to trust. I think I'm lost, she said slowly. I was waiting to go home, but I can't remember the address. I think it was Oak Hill Street, or number 48, maybe. Could have been Willow Lane. She started searching her bag like muscle memory. Handkerchief, coins, a smudged bus ticket. Nothing clear, no phone, no ID, just lost. Andre stayed quiet. His eyes scanned the old woman, searching for anything at all that might point to something solid. An address, a clue. Then he saw it, a glint beneath her coat. A necklace. He leaned closer. An old oval-shaped pendant, tarnished silver, but on the back, still clear as day, a line etched by hand. Evelyn Rose, 48 Oak Hill Drive, North Side. Andrea's heart skipped a beat. He knew that place. Far, way too far, all the way out on the northern edge of town, past 3 long hills, nearly a 2-hour ride. Not a route for the elderly, and not one for a boy racing the clock to avoid sleeping outside. Andre looked at her again. She wasn't a stranger anymore. She was someone lost. She could have been somebody's grandmother, somebody's mom. She could have been his own. And then, just for a moment, the past came rushing in. When Andre was 10, his mom once got disoriented at a bus stop, dizzy and confused. It was a stranger, a sweet old woman selling lottery tickets, who walked her home. Andre never forgot. Neither did his mother. She told him, "Someone stopped that day, not for money, but for me. If you ever see someone like that, remember, helping them is helping yourself too." He took a long breath, steady, certain. "I'll take you home," he said. "It's a bit far, but I know the way." She blinked, puzzled, like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Andre didn't wait for her to refuse. He tied his spare scarf over the back rack of the bike, then gently helped her climb on. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Hold on tight, okay? We'll go slow." She smiled softly, a paper-thin smile, voice trembling. "You look just like my grandson." His shoes were always scuffed up too, but he used to say they showed he never gave up. Andre didn't reply. He looked down and started pedaling. The bike rolled forward, chain clinking in rhythm with the wind. Their shadows stretched long under the streetlights like a silent painting of compassion in a world rushing past. And that old bike pushed on into the frozen night, carrying 2 strangers somehow headed in the same direction. The rusted bicycle creaked off Main Street and veered onto the road out of town. The headwind slapped Andre's face like a razor blade, slicing through the few patches of his threadbare sweater. He didn't say a word, just lowered his head, tightened his grip, and focused every bit of strength into the pedals, making sure Mrs. Evelyn stayed steady on the back. She sat quietly, arms wrapped around the frame, cushioned by the scarf he'd knotted into a makeshift seat. Andre's old coat draped over her like a battlefield blanket. Still, she trembled with every gust. Whenever the bike jolted over a pothole or a patch of gravel, Andre would glance back and ask, "You okay, ma'am?" And she'd smile and nod. Slow, deliberate, like her smile was the only thing keeping her warm. The wind whispered through rows of leafless trees, and dry leaves scattered like lost memories on the move. Andre kept a slow, steady rhythm. Every turn of the wheel was a quiet heartbeat of kindness, unseen, uncelebrated. But he knew every mile brought Mrs. Evelyn closer to home and pushed him further from the hope of having one tonight. Every time they reached a fork in the road, she'd ask, "Is this Garden Street?" And Andre would smile and answer softly, "Not yet, ma'am, but we're almost there." She'd fall quiet for a moment. Then, out of nowhere, she began to hum. A song old and ghost-like, barely more than breath. The melody wavered, sometimes broken, sometimes clear as glass. Andre didn't recognize the tune, but he knew the feeling. It felt like the nights his mother used to lull him to sleep with wordless lullabies. They stopped at an old gas station after nearly an hour and a half of steady pedaling. A blinking neon light flickered over a rust-covered pump. Andre walked inside and laid his last dollar on the counter. "Can I get a hot tea, please?" The clerk squinted at him, torn shoes, shaking hands, no coat, and said nothing. Just poured hot water into a cheap paper cup and handed it over. Andre took the cup outside, steam rising and warming his face just enough to dull the sting. "Here, drink this. It'll warm you up," he said, offering it to her. She pushed it gently back. "You first. You need it more." Andre smiled. "You go ahead. I'm the driver. You're the guest of honor." He chuckled, really laughed for the first time that night. A raspy, crackling laugh that sounded like it'd fallen out of a decades-old memory. As they kept riding, Evelyn started to talk more. She told stories of her grandson, the boy who once lived here, who used to ride his bike in the yard, who made her laugh with offbeat hopscotch routines. She talked like Andre was that boy, come back in a new shape. Andre didn't correct her. He just listened. "Back then," she said, "he used to carry me on his bike too when my feet hurt. Down this same road, over this same bridge, cold like this. Only difference is, I can't remember his face anymore." Andre looked forward. The final hill loomed ahead, steepest, longest, winding up toward Oak Hill Drive. He didn't say a word, just pushed with everything he had. His thighs burned. His fingers went numb. Cold sweat clung to his back, but he didn't stop. When the gate to number 48 appeared, its white paint peeling, ivy wrapped around rusted iron bars, the clock read 9:34 p.m., Andre nearly collapsed as he got off the bike. His hands trembled, his legs gave out, but something in his chest felt strangely light. He knocked on the door and opened. An older man in a bathrobe stood frozen when he saw Evelyn. "Oh, Lord, Miss Evelyn, where have you been? We called the hospital, the police." Evelyn furrowed her brow, then glanced at Andre and gave a small smile. "I just went for a walk, or maybe a little joyride," she said, like she'd just returned from a dream. Andre stepped back. The man invited him in, offered him food, a place to sleep. But Andre shook his head. "I've got to go," he said softly. "Still got some things to take care of." He scribbled a phone number on the back of an old receipt and handed it to the man. "If she needs anything, just call me." Then, without another word, Andre turned around and got back on the bike. He didn't know the room was already locked. He didn't know he'd be sleeping behind a corner store that night. All he knew was he'd done the right thing. And some days, that's enough. The iron gate clicked shut behind him with a soft clack. But in the stillness of night, it sounded like a door closing on the past. He didn't look back, just lowered his head, gripped the freezing handlebars, and pedaled down a road he knew all too well, one worn down by 100 aching knees and tired shoulders. This time, the ride back felt emptier than ever. No soft voice behind him, no gentle laughter when the bike shook. Just the grinding of a worn-out chain and the wind slicing past his ears like sewing needles. Andre didn't feel cold anymore, maybe because his body had gone numb, or maybe because something inside him had gone hollow. The feeling he had didn't have a name. Not quite sadness, not regret, more like the quiet ache of giving something away, something big, without expecting anything in return, just so you'd never have to say, "I should have." He pedaled across the old iron bridge that spanned a narrow creek, past low-roofed houses, past the warm yellow glow of strangers' living room windows. The smell of firewood, cooking smoke, and hot rice drifted through the air. It all seemed to whisper what he didn't have. A place to go back to. By the time Andre reached the boarding house, it was nearly midnight. The two-story building, streaked with peeling paint, sat in darkness, same as always. He parked his bike by the steps and reached into his coat for the key. Once, twice, the third time, nothing. His palm went ice cold. He tore through his pants pockets, flipped his jacket inside out, checked the last corner of his bag. All he found was a torn receipt, the faint scent of cold tea, and a crumpled bill he couldn't pay. Then, as he bent down, his eyes caught a small white plastic bag placed neatly on the top step. Inside, An old t-shirt, a worn towel, and a cracked phone charger. Everything he owned. Taped to the door was a note scribbled in thick black marker. Past due. Locked out. Andre stood there a long time, breathing slow, controlled, like if he kept it quiet enough he wouldn't break, wouldn't cry, wouldn't scream or bang on the door. He knew this moment had been waiting for him. Ever since he chose to turn toward that bus stop instead of his final delivery, he leaned down and picked up the bag, moving so softly it was like he didn't want to wake the whole block. No one saw him then. No one knew he'd just saved a woman from getting lost or worse. No one knew he'd given up the only roof he had for a stranger. Andre turned away, one hand gripping the bag, the other on the handlebars. He pedaled slowly, heading toward the center of town, not because he knew where he was going, but because he couldn't stay where he no longer belonged. On the way he thought of his mother, thought of all the nights they slept in churches, ER waiting rooms, or park benches when he was a kid. The feeling returned like an old wound torn open again. Then he remembered Mr. Johnson. The back door of Johnson's grocery sat off a narrow alley. Andre had helped unload deliveries there a few times in exchange for a loaf of bread or an expired carton of milk. Mr. Johnson didn't talk much, but he never turned someone away if they truly needed help. Andre stopped by the back door and leaned his bike against the dumpster. He knocked 3 times on the metal panel. Silence, and a warm yellow light flickered inside, followed by the slow shuffle of feet. The door creaked open. Mr. Johnson stood there, wrapped in a thick flannel robe, holding a steaming mug of something strong. He looked at Andre, then at the bag in his hand. I didn't ask a thing, just exhaled through his nose and said, "Wouldn't make rent, huh?" Andre nodded once, said nothing. Mr. Johnson stepped aside, pushing the door open wider. "Storage room's empty. There's a folding cot. Don't knock over my wine crates. And don't freeze to death in there." Andre stepped inside. The room smelled of old cardboard and dried orange peels. It was damp, cold, but too refreshing and right. Right now, it was heaven. He sat on the bed and pulled the thin blanket over himself. The cold still clung to the air. The emptiness still clung to his chest, but he felt calm. The kind of calm that comes when you've lost everything but not yourself. The storage room behind Johnson's Market wasn't meant for sleeping. It was built for boxes, wooden pallets, bottles of old wine no one wanted, and crates nobody bothered to open. But tonight, it was the only place that didn't shut Andre out. The fold-out cot creaked as he lay down, the mattress thin as cardboard, springs jabbing at his back with every shift. A small electric heater rattled in the corner, hissing like it had a grudge against winter. But Andre didn't complain. He curled beneath the fuzzy old blanket, eyes fixed on the ceiling above a blank void with no stars, just pipes and cobwebs. Silence settled over the room like a layer of dust. Outside, the wind still howled through the alleys, slipping between cracks in the wall like it was hunting for someone to pull back out into the cold. But inside, Andre stayed still, breathing slow, breathing deep. It might have looked like sleep, but really he was drifting through memories. What played in his mind wasn't Evelyn or the old house with ivy-covered gates. It was his mom. Her voice echoed through his thoughts, delicate but unshakable. "Don't let the world teach you to be cold. You can't control the chill out there, but you can choose to keep your heart warm." He remembered the night she sat on a hospital waiting room bench, with Andre curled in her coat, hands like ice, and her hand gently patting his head as she whispered, "We don't have much, but we still have each other, and that's something money can't buy." She was gone now, and Andre had no one left to crawl into their coat anymore. But he carried those words like a vow. Even if no one saw it, even if no one clapped, he would never trade kindness for comfort. The night passed in stillness. Once the wheels of a cart rolled by in the hallway. Another time a stray cat scratched at the dumpster outside. But Andre didn't move, didn't panic. He just pulled the blanket tighter, let out a long breath, and let himself sink into a fragile sleep. And just before he slipped under completely, he whispered to no one in particular, "I'm still warm, Mama. Even in this cold." Tomorrow, he'd wake early, help Mr. Johnson restock the milk crates, maybe earn himself a wrapped sandwich and a cup of day-old coffee. Nothing would be different. But tonight, Andre had crossed through the cold with a warmth no one could take. And for someone like him, that was the first quiet victory in a very long time. The next morning, the sky was still gray, like it couldn't decide whether or not to become a new day. Light crept in through the cracks in the storage door, casting a dim glow on peeling paint and the faint shadow of Andre, curled on the folding cot. He'd been up for a while, still wearing the same worn t-shirt and faded jeans. Andre gathered the blanket in his hands and folded it neatly in the corner. He splashed his face with cold water from the utility sink, and then got to work, just like he had every morning in every temporary place he'd ever stayed. Out front, Mr. Johnson flipped the open sign with the same motion he'd done for years. When he saw Andre step out from the back, he simply nodded, then slid a banana and a cup of weak coffee across the counter. "Ain't no buffet," he rasped, "but it'll warm you up." Andre smiled and took them. No long thank yous. For them, a nod and a glance said more than words ever could. He stood by the glass door, sipping the coffee in slow, careful sips, watching the town begin to stir. Steam rose from car hoods. Its dragged backpacks down the sidewalk. Engines roared to life. A few dogs barked, then disappeared into alleys. Just another morning, until that black car pulled up and glided to a stop in front of the shop. It wasn't the kind of car people drove around here. It was long, polished to perfection. Its tires moved like they barely touched the ground. And out stepped a tall man, sharp black overcoat, spotless shoes, eyes clear and focused, but not cold. He looked down at a small note in his hand, then up, his gaze scanning the storefront glass like he already knew exactly who he was looking for. The bell above the door rang as he stepped inside. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep, calm, the kind of voice that people naturally listen to. "I'm looking for someone named Andre." Andre turned, froze. "I'm Andre," he said, cautious. The man smiled, and there was nothing distant about it. "Miss Evelyn Rose asked me to find you," he said. "She wanted to say thank you." "And she remembers everything now?" The air inside the store seemed to slow. Even Mr. Johnson paused mid-pour, quietly watching from behind the counter. Andre didn't say a word. His eyes dropped to the slip of paper in the man's hand. It was the old receipt, the one he'd scribbled his number on with a leaky pen that night. He'd thought that scrap of paper had been forgotten, like most things he'd ever left behind in this world. "She's really hoping to see you again," the man, his name was Charles, added. "Not to repay you, just to say something she didn't get the chance to before." Andre stayed silent, his chest tightened not from fear, but from the shock of realizing someone still remembered him. Even after he'd fallen out of their view, Charles gently opened the door, motioning toward the car waiting outside. "If you're ready, she's waiting." Andre looked out at the street, then down at his worn-out shoes, then back toward Mr. Johnson. The old man just shrugged, a gesture that didn't push, didn't preach, just the kind grown folks give when they won't stop you from doing what's right. "Go on," he said softly. "Scoro'll still be here if you come back." Andre nodded. His hands trembled a little, but there was something different in his eyes. Not hope, but a fragile kind of belief. The kind of belief born in people who have nothing left to lose. But for the first time ever, someone actually wanted them to come in. And so Andre stepped out of the store, climbed into the car, and let it take him back to where it all began. Not for a reward, but because this time, someone still remembered his name. The car glided through the same streets Andre had pedaled down just the night before. Except now he wasn't on a bike, wasn't shivering in the wind, wasn't carrying the weight of being unwanted. He sat in the back seat, quiet, watching the world pass through the fogged-up window. Midday sunlight spilled gently over the trees lining the road. In daylight, the road to Oak Hill didn't seem as daunting as it had last night. The steep hills were just winding paths dappled with shade. Everything looked softer and the light easier to breathe in. But inside, Andres still felt cold. Not from the weather, but from the doubt smoldering inside him like ash beneath cold coals. The car pulled up in front of the old white house. Same gate, same ivy-covered walls, same tall steps, where last night Andre had arrived with legs too tired to stand. But today he climbed them on his own, steadier, even if not fully ready inside. Charles led him through the side path, past a garden glowing in sunlight, and stopped at a bright, sunlit room. Stacks of books, curtains dancing in the breeze, a small wooden table by the window, and there, sitting by it, was Evelyn. This time she wasn't confused. She wasn't lost. She wasn't drifting. She looked up when he entered, her eyes clearer, brighter, locked on his, and her smile bloomed slowly, like ripples across a still lake at sunrise. "You came," she said, voice trembling slightly but steady. The boy with the old bike, and the kind of kindness that doesn't ask for anything back. André froze. He didn't dare step closer. He wasn't used to warmth meant just for him. "You remember me?" he asked, voice dry. "Every detail," she replied. "The hills, the scarf you tied to the back seat, the tea you handed me, the way you smiled when I mistook you for the grandson I lost." She reached out, not demanding, just offering. André stepped forward, sat down, hands clamped to his knees. She took his hand, warm, soft, steady. "My daughter know your whole story," she said. "But if you don't have a place to go, I'd like to offer you one here. Not of a pity, but because you stirred something in me I thought was long gone." André lowered his gaze. To most it would have sounded like a gift, but to him it was like sunlight on a scar still healing. He was afraid of getting rained on again, after thinking he'd found shelter. "Thank you," he said quietly, "but I didn't do it to be repaid. I just wanted to make sure you got home safe." "And that," Evelyn said, her voice unwavering, "this is exactly why I want you to stay." André stood, took a step back. I need to think. I still have things to do, but I'll come back." She didn't stop him. She just nodded. "This door doesn't lock." Charles drove André back to the grocery store as if nothing had happened. When André walked in, Mr. Johnson glanced up and asked just one question. "You need an extra blanket?" André nodded. Didn't smile. His heart was still a mess of questions. But that night, as he curled up again in the cold storage room, his mind drifted to Evelyn's hand. A hand that trembled, but held his like it belonged to a grandson she'd never stopped loving. Maybe for the first time in a long time, André didn't feel completely invisible. That morning, the old house on Oak Hill stood quieter than usual. The house staff moved softly. Even the clinking of teacups was muffled, as if afraid to disturb the silence blanketing the second floor. In a gently lit reading room, Evelyn Rose sat alone beside a slightly opened window. The faint sunlight outside only seemed to deepen the emptiness inside her. On the table lay a gray wool scarf, André's old one. The knit was frayed, the scent of soap still faint in the threads, but she could smell something deeper in it. Trust, something she hadn't touched in far too long. Evelyn wasn't easily shaken. She'd been raised to be strong, sharp, and never let anyone see her fragile. She'd run companies, sat on gala boards, been called the Iron Lady by magazines. But all of that money, power, image had meant nothing the night she got lost, and no one stopped to help. Except André, a skinny stranger with a squeaky bicycle, dark circles under his eyes, and a heart full of light. Evelyn closed her eyes and let the memory come. The last image she had of her only grandson Matthew was of him at 14, grinning in the brand-new sneakers she'd given him. But Matthew never got any older. An accident took him just weeks later. From that day on, Evelyn stopped giving anyone shoes. She never spoke his name again. She was afraid of pain, and after so long she'd forgotten how to remember. Then André showed up. And he didn't say much. He just held her hand the way Matthew once had. Didn't ask, didn't expect. He just stayed, exactly when she needed someone most. And somehow that simple touch unraveled the knot she'd been tying around her heart for years. Evelyn opened a drawer and took out an old leather journal. On the first page was a photo of Matthew at 6 years old, sitting on a tiny bike in the middle of the driveway. She looked at it, then rested her hand on the image gently, like an apology. "Matthew, maybe I shut the door too long, but today I saw you again, not in the same face, but through someone else, a boy who gives without needing a reason. I think it's time I open that door again." She sat down at the desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. Her handwriting wasn't as crisp as it used to be, but each line was steady like a promise you don't take back. Andre, this isn't a gesture of pity. This is a chance for me to live differently. You didn't just help me get home. You brought me back to the part of myself I thought I had lost. If you're still unsure where you're going, let this be a place to begin again. I won't promise it'll be easy, but I promise this. You won't have to walk alone anymore. She placed the letter in an envelope, sealed it carefully, and added one more thing. A necklace that once belonged to Matthew. A small chain with a star-shaped pendant. Old but still shining. She tucked it in the envelope, saying nothing more. That afternoon, Evelyn walked out of the house herself, wearing a cream-colored wool coat and low heels she hadn't touched in years. The staff rushed to ask if she needed a car. She shook her head. I need to walk this one, she said. Little things. If you don't go to them on your own, you never reach. And so she made her way to Johnson's Grocery, the place with the cold storage room, the creaky folding cot, and a boy trying to live kindly in a world that rarely returned the favor. She didn't come with expectations. She only brought a promise that if Andre had the courage to open his heart, she wouldn't let him shut it again. That morning started like any other. Andre woke early, cleaned the back room, stacked soda crates on the shelves, a routine that gave his thoughts somewhere to rest. But he couldn't stop thinking about the day before, about Evelyn stepping through the door of the little store in her wool coat, holding a small paper bag. No driver, no assistant, just an old woman who had once been lost, now walking back into a stranger's life, gently, as if her presence alone could slow the world down. He remembered she hadn't said much, just placed the paper bag on the worn counter. Inside was his scarf freshly washed, neatly folded, and an envelope. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter, soft but steady, and a small gift. The star-shaped pendant. Andre hadn't read it right away. He waited until the lights were off and the store had gone quiet, until he was back on the noisy cot. Only then, under the hum of silence, did he finally open it, and every word filled a space he'd long assumed would stay empty forever. She hadn't promised to change his life. She'd only promised this. If he came back, there'd be a place called home, and it wouldn't lock its heart to him. That afternoon, the black car pulled up in front of the store again. But this time, Andre wasn't caught off guard. He had already packed everything he owned. A small backpack, a few changes of clothes, a worn-out journal, and a faded photo of his mother. Everything fit neatly into the suitcase of a life about to change. Mr. Johnson leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "You heading out?" he asked. Andre nodded. Mr. Johnson handed him a paper bag. Inside were 3 ham sandwiches and a bottle of apple juice. "Pretty sure she doesn't serve this kind of sandwich," he said quietly, his tone somewhere between dry and tender. Andre stepped forward and gripped his hand tight. "I'll come back," he said. "Not to sleep in the storage room, but to say thank you." Miss Johnson didn't reply, just nodded like he always did. But this time his eyes lingered long after the door closed behind Andre. The second time Andre returned to Oak Hill, the house no longer felt too big for him. Still the same white fence, the old shingles, the ivy casting shadows across the stone. But this time, he didn't arrive as a passerby. He walked in as someone who had been invited. Mrs. Evelyn was waiting by the side door. No fancy dress, no pearls, just a simple knit sweater and a steaming cup of tea in her hands. "You came," she said. Andre nodded, didn't say a word, but his eyes said everything. No longer the look of someone asking for shelter, but of someone ready to begin again. "Your room's upstairs, faces the garden. There's a desk and a shelf if you need them," she said, like she was introducing it to her own grandson. "When you're ready, we'll talk more about school, about grants, or whatever you want to do." Andre looked around. No marble floors, no gold trim, just a quiet, weathered house that seemed somehow ready to come alive again. "Never thought I'd have a place like this," Andre whispered, "and I never thought I'd deserve it." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She laid a hand on his shoulder, light as a breeze. "You don't have to deserve it," she said. "You just have to believe. The rest we'll learn together." Andre nodded, and that's how it started. Not with fanfare, not with teary speeches, but with one quiet step into a sunlit room. And for someone like Andre, that was the greatest kind of miracle. Time passed, not quickly, not loudly. Life at Oak Hill wasn't a fairy tale. It was quiet mornings with sunlight slipping through curtains, hot tea shared in silence, books opened, between two generations, one searching for herself again, and one discovering for the first time he could dream big. Andre didn't turn into someone else. He still woke up early, still rinsed his own cup after breakfast, still kept his shoes a little scuffed to remember where he started. But now, Evelyn was beside him, not a benefactor, but a companion no longer afraid of being lost. Within a few weeks, thanks to Evelyn's steady behind-the-scenes help, Andre re-enrolled in school. No one in his class knew he used to sleep in a stockroom, that he'd lost his mother, that he'd biked through freezing nights for a handful of dollars. They only knew Andre, the kid who always listened, was always on time, and never hesitated to say thank you. But beyond the classroom, something bigger had begun. One afternoon, in the sun-drenched living room, Evelyn spread a project draft across the table, her hands still shaky, but her eyes completely steady. "Little Light," she said. "That's the name you came up with, right?" Andrea nodded. "Below for Where I Met You? Light, because I thought someone out there needs to see the end of the tunnel." And so the Willow Light Foundation was born. No ribbon cuttings, no press conferences. Just a small fund seeded by Evelyn, with Andre designing the programs. They supported unhoused youth, connecting them with trade schools, life skills workshops, and most importantly, people who listened without judgment. They also launched a pairing program, linking lonely seniors with young adults searching for a place to stay, not as guests, as housemates, sharing meals, stories, warmth. It was Evelyn who said first, "If I have a house big enough and a heart soft enough, why would I keep the door closed to those who once felt just like me, lost and silent?" Andre helped write the grant plans, sat in on community interviews, and listened to each story like he was listening to a version of his own. Once, while speaking to a young man just released from juvenile detention, Andre simply said, "You don't have to prove anything. Just don't stop believing in tomorrow." Every month, Andre still rode his old bike into town, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He'd stop by Johnson's Market and drop off a box of pastries from the home kitchen. "Look at you rich now, huh?" Mr. Johnson said, half teasing, half proud. Andre smiled. "Not rich," he said, "just a little less lost than before." And every time he passed the old bus stop, the place where it all began, Andre slowed down. He looked toward the bench where Evelyn once sat, then tilted his head back and let out a long breath, not out of regret, not out of pride, but out of gratitude, because he understood some things in life can't be planned, can't be measured in dollars, and can't be traded. They only happen when someone pauses, sees a person in need, and says, "I see you." Now at the bottom of every newsletter from the Willow Light Foundation, there's always a small line that reads, "Family isn't always where you're born. Sometimes it's where someone is willing to walk with you through the dark." Andre was no longer the invisible boy pedaling through the night. He was living proof that sometimes one action done without expectation can be the beginning of a family, not by blood, but by humanity.